Thank you. This is Striving for Perfection, the YouTube channel that is dedicated to bringing you biblical information on subjects that you bring to me. The subject that we are talking about in this series is giving, and today's lesson will be tithing under the law, and we'll understand how that does or does not apply to us today. The music that you hear, that is T.L. Robinson, and you can check him out and please subscribe to his channel. He's got some really, really good music, and I think you'll be blessed by it. All right, so that again is T.L. Robinson. Click that icon, check him out. As always, please subscribe, please comment, please tell others about the channel, and tell me what else you'd like me to cover, and I'll be more than happy to do that. So as we get into today's discussion, as we talk about giving, all right, so we've broken this up into three parts, and that is tithing before, during, and after the law. We'll look at seed sowing and the prosperity gospel, and we will look at free grace giving. So today we are looking at tithing during the law. Now, this is going to be quite interesting if you've never actually thought about, looked at, or had anyone teach you anything about tithing under the law. But as always, when it comes to tithing, it's a question of tradition versus the Bible, because tradition tells us one thing, and I guarantee you the Bible's telling us something else. No, now, how should we look at the law to inform us today? Does it tell us if we need to tithe or not tithe? I think that under the law, we're going to find out that it's going to tell us nothing about whether or not we should be tithing or not today, but it's definitely not going to bind us to it. What is the biblical purpose for tithing under the law? And then does this have any importance for what we do today? And I believe that it actually does quite a bit. All right, so most people, when they think of the law, they think of Deuteronomy, they think of Moses, but you're going to have to use Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus because that's all part of the law, but Deuteronomy is the main place. Deuteronomy is the second telling or repeating of the law. So the law was already there. So when the children of Israel had come up out of Egypt, and after they spent their 40 years in the wilderness, so all of those individuals could die off who were not going to be able to go into the land for their lack of faith, Moses then stands and tells them this second repeating of the law. The law is broken up into three things, and this is really important. And if you don't get this, then you will make the mistake of applying the law where you shouldn't. There are three types of laws. The first one is civil. That was directly for Israel. It had to do with their property, disputes between one another. It's just like a civil law that you and I have in our county or in our city or in the nation, whatever the civil law might be. Then there's the ceremonial law. So this is more of a religious thing. This is the spiritual responsibilities of Judaism and what they had to do from a spiritual perspective with God. So they had the ceremonial law that Jesus would fulfill. So these first two laws do not apply to us today. Then there is a moral law. That is a transcendent one. That is a law for all times. Don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, all the sexual sins, all of those things are transcendent for all times. So if you understand that, then you'll be able to put the laws into their proper places so you'll know how they apply to you or I today. Now, the tithes in the law, and if you'll notice, I have tithes plural, because we're going to see in a minute it was more than one tithe, which immediately puts you in a position of difficulty if you're trying to use the law to prove that we have to tithe today. So the tithes in the law are fulfillment of Jacob's vow. Stop right here. If you did not see the first video, then you're going to be a little bit confused. If you go back to the first video, then you will understand that's the video tithing before the law. You will understand this statement that I've made, but I'm going to give you the scripture anyway. Genesis 28:20. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. So the vow is a condition. It's an if-then statement. If this happens, then this will happen. So basically, Jacob has had a dream, and in that dream, God has told him that he was going to be with him and he was going to keep his brother Esau from killing him, and he would get him back to his father's house. So he says, basically, if you'll do that, then you'll be my God. And the result of that would be in verse 22, this stone which I've set up as a pillar will be God's house. That will become Bethel. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. All that you give me. Y'all see that? And then I will surely give a tenth to you. So the vow is that if you do this, then I'm going to do this. All right. And you understand that when you vow something to God, it has to be fulfilled. So it's the question of Genesis 28 and 22, and all that you give me. What did God give him? Again, if you saw the first video, then you understand what's about to take place. Jacob had this dream. He was running from his brother Esau. Esau had threatened to kill him. Jacob, on his way, stops at this place that he will call Bethel. In Genesis 28 and 12, he had a dream. Behold, a ladder was set up on earth with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. That is a reference to the fact that God would be his provider and his protector. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your descendants. So what you basically see here is that Jacob understands that he's going to receive the land that he's laying on. And then he goes off and he gives this vow and basically says, I will give you a tenth of that. So if he's going to receive this land on which he lies, and he says, I will give it to you and your descendants, then you can see that Jacob has made this vow concerning the land. And now things will really jump off and make sense to you, because Jacob never possessed the land. He never fully possessed the land. It was when the children of Israel went into the promised land some 400 years later, that's when they actually possessed the land. So the tithes in the law are a fulfillment of Jacob's vow, because when they went to possess the land, that vow had to be fulfilled. You don't believe me? Let's look at some scriptures. This is Leviticus 27 and 30. Thus, all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. It's holy to the Lord's. Pay close attention to Leviticus 27 and 30, because a lot of preachers today will tell you that the tithe is the Lord's. This is where they're getting this from. Here's the problem with that. This was not written to us today. This was written to the Israelites of that day. This was written because Jacob said that the land that you're going to give me, basically, that's what he said, whatever you give me, and it's the land, that land, he said, I will give you a tenth, which means that that tenth belongs to the Lord. The Lord said, I'm going to give it to you. Then Jacob said, I'm going to give you a tenth of it back. So all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. It's holy to the Lord. The question is, how in the world do you tithe the land? Look in Genesis 28:22 again, just to make sure we get this. This stone, which I have set up as a pillar, will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. This is why the tithe is the Lord's under the law. It is the Lord's under the law. If you saw my video before about tithing before the law, the only one that tithed before the law that we saw was Abram. And when Abram tithed, he was giving to it was never an expectation that he was vowing anything or that he was fulfilling anything. He was doing it strictly voluntary. This is not voluntary. This is in reference to the vow. Verses 31 just talks about if you want to somehow redeem your tithe for whatever reason, you had to add 20% to make up for it, and then what you were tithing. But when you get down to verse 34, what's interesting is these words. These are the commandments which the Lord God commanded Moses for the son of Israel at Mount Sinai. So if these commandments were done at Mount Sinai, then this makes tithes a part of the ceremonial law, because in those commandments that he received at Mount Sinai, you had some moral law, but you also had some of the ceremonial laws. And so what we're looking at then is that tithes fall into the aspect of the ceremonial laws. So if they're in that category, and if we're looking at them from that perspective, then we come to the New Testament and we look at Galatians, where Paul is writing to the church at Galatia that has been infiltrated by Judaistic teachers that are trying to teach them to go back under the law. And in explaining to them what the law was for and what it was about, in chapter 3, verse 23, he says, but before faith came, we were kept in custody under the law, being shut up to the faith which was later to be revealed. Therefore, the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ. Now, when he says in verse 23 that we were kept in custody, he's not talking about that we were in jail. This is like protective custody, which is why he calls it a tutor, so that we may be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. What's interesting is the word tutor. When you and I think of a tutor, we think of someone that we send our children to, or that we had to go to help us learn something. But this is not about teaching. So let me see if I can mess up this Greek word, pedagagonon, which I think I got it right, did not simply teach a child. That's not what this is about. In the Greco-Roman world, if you were someone of some affluence, had some money, and you had a son, this was mostly done for the boys, you would go out and you would hire someone that today we might almost qualify as a nanny, but you would usually hire a man, and that man would take over raising the child for you, and basically to raise them to become a man and to become whatever kind of man you deem that they should have been. So the actual Greek word paidia, that's literally child, and the rest of it means escort. So this is a child escort, to escort them from their childhood to their maturity. So the law was to escort us from our immaturity into our maturity when we are justified by faith, because we couldn't be justified by the law. So tithes then, now, if they're, as we've seen, they're related to the land, we understand also that how we should look at the law is that the law is a tutor, or this escort that is teaching us how to understand our maturity in Christ. Then what we do with the law is we're going to look back and we're going to see what the law is teaching us. So the first thing that we understand is that the tithes were related to the land. So in order to tithe, the land had to produce. Now this is important, and it will help you with your giving today. Deuteronomy 11 and 13, it shall come about, if you listen obediently to my commandments, which I am commanding you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and your soul, that now, this right here, this is a scripture you may want to write down. That is Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 15. He will give the rain for your land in its season. They were in a desert area without the early and late rain that you see here in verse 14. Nothing would grow. Because God gives them the rain, the early and the late rain, that they may gather in your grain and your new wine and your oil. He will give grass in your fields for your cattle. So because God is providing the rain in a land that is basically a desert, what will end up happening is you will have the grain to eat, and you will have your grapes that will grow, and your olives that will grow. So that's where you get your wine, that's where you get your oil. And then he will give grass in your field for your cattle. So if the cattle, the sheep, and all of the the oxen, if they're eating, they'll reproduce. And if they reproduce and they're healthy, then you'll be able to eat well. And notice what it says here: and you will eat and be satisfied. And these other scriptures, Job 5 and 10, Zechariah 10:1, Joel 2:23 through 26, all speak of God as the rain giver. Rain was extremely important to Israel. See, when Jesus said it rains on the just and the unjust alike, he wasn't using rain as a metaphor of something bad. In that context, it is something wonderful. So God is providing for them everything that they need. But I want you to pay close attention to where he says, and you will eat and be satisfied. To be satisfied means you're not going to go hungry. So what does this teach us? In order to understand what this teaches us, when you go to the Bible and you use proper biblical hermeneutics, the first thing you do is observation. What does it say? And then you use interpretation. What does it mean? All right, so I think we've gone through that piece of it, but the application, that's what does this teach us? What does this mean for me? But in order to do this, you have to understand what it means for the people that it was directly written to. So what did this mean to the Israelites? What would they have taken to this? Well, that God is the rain giver. He provides the land's production so they can have enough to eat and be satisfied. Now, if he's providing that, then in addition, if he's requiring them to give this tithe of the land, or literally pay, it's like a tax. and that should be tithes of the land, then he is providing enough for them to eat and to tithe. So please understand, so he produces first enough for them to eat and tithe, and also there's some required offerings that are in the law, and there are some free will offering that they get to do, that they get to decide upon, that they get to give. And God is going to give them enough to do all of that and still eat and be completely satisfied. Okay, so what does that mean for me today? It's real simple. It's the principle that God blesses us with what we need for everything, including our giving. So that whole concept of you're going to give, you're going to, you're blessed if you give, wrong. You give because you are blessed. You don't give to get blessed. You're blessed to give. God blesses first, not after. Please understand. It's not you doing something, then God blessing you for it. It's God blessing you with the ability to actually do it. And by the way, if they're going to have enough to eat and do all of these other things, somebody tell me where they're sacrificing anything. Where this is a sacrifice, like they went a day without eating so that they could give to God. When somebody tells you, well, don't pay your light bill, but you come and you put this money in church, you got to tithe. That is a bold-faced lie. All right. Now, did you know that there were three? That's right, three different tithes under the law. Did you know that? Did you have any idea that that was the case? If you didn't, here's a shocker for you. Tithe number one. This is out of Numbers 18:21 through 26, and it deals with the Levites. Now, what you got to understand about the Levites is when the children of Israel came into the land, the Levites didn't have a portion of land. Because the Levites didn't have a portion of land, then you got to ask yourself a question. Could the Levites tithe? Because every other tribe, gets some land, and then they would have to tithe from that land. But the Levites wouldn't get any land. So A, you might wonder, since we're talking about tithing, could they tithe? We're going to show you that they did. But B, you're probably saying, if they didn't get any land, how in the world did they survive? Well, they survived off of the tithes. And we're going to see they survived off of all three of the tithes. The Levites were in mind when God says the tithe is mine, he also is going to take care of the Levites. So they were literally, and I'm sorry, but this is a lot. I know, but please bear with me on this and watch what happens. So in verse 21 of Numbers 18, he says, to the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel for an inheritance. Now, it's his tithe, and so he's going to give it to them. He says that he's going to give it to them for their inheritance in return, but this is the key, in return for their service, which they perform, the service of the tent meeting. So the Levites are basically compensated for the fact that they lead all of the worshiping in Israel. It is their job as priests to be the choir. They do the singing. It is their job to do the prayers in the temple or the tabernacle. That's what the tent meetings are. It is their job to go into the holy place and the holy of holies. It is their job to take the sacrifices for sin, those animals, and do the burnt offerings and all of those things. That's their job. So in verse 22, he tells the rest of Israel, the sons of Israel, don't you even attempt to do any of these things, because the priesthood is going to be the mediator between me and you, is what's going on here. If you try to overstep this boundary, you die. Only the Levites will perform this service. All right. So verse 24, for the tithe of the sons of Israel, which they offer as an offering to the Lord, I have given them to the Levites for an inheritance. All right. So everyone else inherited land. The Levites will inherit God's tithe. Therefore, I have said concerning them, they shall have no inheritance among the sons of Israel. So that means that they won't have any land, but what they will get, what they will be compensated with other than land, is the tithe from the land that belonged to the Lord. So the Lord has earmarked the tithe, you can say, in this case, that these tithes will take care of the Levites. All right. As we move on to verse 26, 25 and 26, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, moreover, you shall speak to the Levites and say to them, when you take from the sons of Israel the tithe which I have given you, from them for your inheritance, then you shall present an offering from it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. So the Levitical tribe, whatever they got from the rest of Israel, then they took a tenth of that and they gave that to the Lord. Now, it's kind of strange because they would have to give it back, basically, in a sense, to themselves, because they're going to give it, bring the tithes into the storehouse, so there should be meat in my house. So they're going to put a tenth of that back in. But it was all for them to eat and take care of themselves. So it was almost as if God was saying, you're going to take a tenth of this and put it away for savings. But understand that the Levites are the ones that he has in mind here. And then you've got to look at it from this perspective as well. If the Israelites become disobedient and don't tithe, then the Levites can't eat. And if the Levites can't eat, they end up going out trying to find a place to plant, trying to find a place to get some cattle and try to eat. And if they're doing that, then they will no longer be in the temples. They will no longer be singing the songs and doing the praises and doing the prayers and doing the sacrifices and all of the things that they're required to do, that they're supposed to be compensated for. And when that happens, watch what I'm about to say. You begin to rob God of his worship. Keep that in mind. So here's the principle. So we understand what this means for them, as I just kind of laid it out for you, that they should be taken care of out of the tithe for the acts of worship that they do. If they don't, then God is going to be robbed of his worship. So what should the church take from this? Well, this is the principle that's real simple for me. The church can compensate people for their work and lead in the congregation in worship. I mean, there's always this question of, well, can you pay people for doing this? And is it right? Shouldn't people be just doing this out of the kindness of their heart? Biblically speaking, we can compensate people for doing that. Now, the church that I pastor, we're all volunteers. I mean, including myself. No one gets paid. But a church where they're paying a praise team, paying musicians, paying all of these different people to do things, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the Bible basically would argue definitely that the pastor should be taken care of, and those that teach, as well as you can take the principle of anyone that is helping everyone else in worship can be compensated. All right, tithe number 2. This is my favorite tithe. Deuteronomy 14, 22 and 27. This is the worship tithe. This is the one that you use in celebration of convocations of worship at the sanctuary. I love this tithe. You'll love it too. Verse 22 says, you shall surely tithe all the produce from what you sow, which comes out of the field every year. You shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God. By the way, there is the first tithe that you read, that's a 10. This tithe is another 10. Ah, yes. So now you're sitting here going, wait, that's like 20%, isn't it? You're getting smart. Your mind is working. You're starting to think. But remember, God is going to give them enough to do all of this. All right. So when someone tries to start talking about what Deuteronomy says, but the tithe, blah, blah, then you say, well, so are we going to do all three? What are we going to do? And you'll notice there's no money mentioned here, but we'll get to a money thing in a minute. You shall surely tithe this produce. Verse 23, you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God. Back up. Hold up. Wait a minute. Hit the brakes. This is saying that they're going to bring a tent and they're going to get to eat it. That's what that says. And it says, at the place where he chooses to establish his name, which would be Jerusalem, the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and your flock. So that's the good meat. So that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. So well, this last part, it may throw you a little bit. The word fear here means to reverence. And what he's saying is, I'm going to give you and produce for you enough for you to have enough to eat. But what I need you to do is this: the tithe belongs to me. So you're going to take a tenth of what I produce, and you're going to give that so the Levites can eat. You're going to take another tenth of what I produce, and you're going to take that, and you're going to come, and you're going to get with me, and we're going to have a celebration. All right. And so that you understand that by putting me first, that you're reverencing me. This is a way of saying that they put God first. And in doing that, God says, we're going to celebrate. We're going to have a party. So in this context, it just simply means to put the Lord first. So the tithe is teaching them to do that, put him first and celebrate it. All right. as we move on in the other verses, if the distance is so great for you that you are not able to bring the tithe, in other words, if you got so much, God has done so much that it's too much of a pain to bring it, since the place where the Lord your God chooses to set his name is too far away from you, when the Lord your God blesses you, then you shall exchange it for money and bind that money in your hand and go to the place where the Lord God your chooses. Now watch this. You're not going to bring money though. Verse 26, you may spend the money for whatever your heart desires. This is mind-boggling for me, because if you're going to run back and always run to Deuteronomy to try to tell me something, and Deuteronomy is talking directly to the Israelites and not me, okay, well then let's do this. Let's take the money and let's go spend it on whatever our heart desires, for oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink. Wait a minute, strong drink. And the Bible warns us about strong drink. But in this instance, God says, hey, when it comes to me and we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate this thing, then you can go and get the strong drink. Now, does that mean that the church should go out and get some liquor and all that? No, because that is suicide according to biblical standards. Strong drink is what we would call a nice, very, very almost a non-alcoholic wine, just a little alcohol in it. But, you know, it's here. I ain't making this up. It's here. He says, or whatever your heart desires, whatever you want, spend the money on that. What? Why? And there you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God. We're going to have a party. But then in verse 27, also you shall not neglect the Levite who is in your town, for he has no portion or inheritance among you. So on your way in, bring the Levite with you, whoever is running the synagogue in that town, or whatever the case may be. And you be sure that you share with them so that they can come and participate too. So you see, the first tithe was for the Levites. The second tithe, the Levites have a portion in. So if tithes was used to celebrate then, what is given in the church today should be used for celebrations of coming together. And churches celebrate coming together all the time. We have Christmas parties and fall festivals and the spring whatever and the annual whatever day. You know, we celebrate the church anniversary. All of these things are celebrated. The problem with the church is, you if I'm going to use the Old Testament and let it teach me, what it's going to teach me is that these celebrations, I should not be assessed a price for coming. One has everyone to give $20 for. Why? Why? The money's being mismanaged. Look, if you can't have a celebration, the money's being mismanaged. I'm going to say it again. If you can't have some kind of celebration, the money's being mismanaged. If you can't come together and just eat and enjoy and celebrate God for what God is doing, something is flat out wrong. There's something is wrong. Because if you're going to understand what this is teaching us, it's teaching us that our giving is not just for, I guess, things to make things go right. It's also for celebrating. We're to share in this together and celebrate. All right, number 3. And this is the one that some people seem to know and they hear a lot about. And this is a major complaint and totally understandable. Deuteronomy 14:28 through 29, the welfare tithe. This is for the Levites. Again, the Levites are in this one, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. So here you go. Deuteronomy 14:28. At the end of every third year. So this happens every third year. The other ones happen every year. So then every third year, you're gonna have a tithe for the Levites, a tithe for the celebration, and this third year tithe, and these are going to be stored up and used over the next 2 years. You shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year and shall deposit it in your town. The Levite, so this sticks, it doesn't even go out. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the alien, all right, all the tithe of the produce of that year. So it's just another tithe. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the alien, the orphan, and the widow who are in your town shall come and eat and be satisfied, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand, which you do. So you've got to understand, it goes to your, notice it where it goes. It goes to your town to take care of the local issue. All right. So think of Judaism from this perspective. Everything comes out of Jerusalem, but you locally in your own town need to handle these people. The Levite, Okay, because he has no portion. So this literally means that his source of income is you. The alien, this is someone who is not Israeli, has come into the country and can't earn a living. They can't because they're not Israeli. Therefore, this is a welfare kind of thing. So they get to be taken care of. The orphan, who would be a child who owns no property, has no way, again, of going out to work and eat, they get taken care of. The widow, another one, another case where having lost her husband and, maybe she's a widow with small children, so she's the one that needs to be, or she's so far up in age, whatever the case may be, she is to be taken care of out of the tithes. But notice, who are in your town. All right, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. So this tithe is tied to the fact that when Deuteronomy says, I put before you a blessing and a curse, and God says, here are the tithes, I'm going to give you enough to do all of these things, you have to follow through even in this. This would be the one that they probably would have had the most problem with. All right, we're going to have to take care of the Levites. All right, that's fine. That's good. Okay. Oh, we get to go celebrate and eat with this. Okay, that's good. But wait a minute. You to mean that someone comes through, these orphans, these widows, we got to take care of them too? Don't really like that. But the Levite, the alien, the orphan, and the widow. All right. So the Israelite understood from this tithe that strangers, orphans, and widows all would be a difficult position to get income, were to be helped by this tithe. All right. And of course, the Levites, every tithe, the Levites got their portion. They always did. But except for the Levite, these others did not tithe themselves. And this is in here because if you look at the widow who gave the one mite or the penny or whatever, you always hear these preachers coming on and telling you, she gave it all. See, Jesus says she gave it all. Jesus was not happy. Jesus was talking about the scribes and how and the Pharisees, but the scribes specifically, because it was their job at that particular time to ensure that the tithes that were given from the people, that they went out to help these widows. And he singled it out, this group. But what they were doing is they were taking that money and they were giving the widow just enough to eat while they were putting the money in their pockets. And so when she went and she was putting money into the tithes, all that she had, they should have stopped her. That was being put in would have been for her. It was not for her to tithe. There are some people that orphans, they didn't have any part under the law, the strangers or the aliens in the giving. Just the Levites who received from the tithe had to tithe on the tithe. So what does that mean for the church? Well, literally, something should be earmarked, a percentage or some way. There should be something set up that you could help those who are in need. Now, you could say widows and orphans, or you could say those who are in a position where they literally cannot generate something and they need to eat. I mean, and that's what it really goes down to. There needs to be eating or something that goes on. So the church can help those. But here's the deal. When assisting those in need, no expectation of payback or expectation of them giving while they are in need should be imposed on them. In other words, if you help a family out who's been devastated by something, whatever the case may be, job loss and loss of income, or no unemployment insurance, whatever is going on, they had a fire or whatever, don't come and sit there and go, hey, look, we're going to give you this $100, but you're going to have to pay us back. That's not welfare. That is a loan, and you don't do that. But remember that whole part that I was talking about where he said in your local town? There's another principle that I didn't put on here, that as an individual you should understand about your giving. You're giving to the church. If you look at those first two tithes, you say, well, I'm giving to support those who lead us in worship. And I'm giving so that, and by the way, that might be the building as well, paying electricity, all that stuff, everything that supports the worship and coming together. But then also that we have celebrations. But that third one, you don't have to give to the church. In fact, you can directly give to the individual locally. You should set aside something yourself as an individual to help others out. All right, that God has blessed you to be a blessing. All right, don't put all of that burden on the church. In fact, I could take you to the New Testament and show you where the Apostle Paul tells us blatantly that it is not the church's job to go help people, that their family should help them. So your first thought should be to help your own family members, and then to help anyone else that you can before you bring it to the church. So my conclusions, and these are my conclusions, and you can throw them out the window. Please tell me where you find me to be wrong. But here's my deal. Even if I get some aspect of tithing under the law, let's say I got some of it wrong, it's still under the law, and it's still a part of the ceremonial law, and it was still fulfilled at the time of Jesus. You can't impose that on us or the church today. So first of all, the law teaches us, not binds us. Please understand that. It teaches, it doesn't bind. We can't impose tithing based on the law. All right, we can't. So that gets us into that whole Malachi thing that everyone tries to use. You can't use that to make me tithe. You cannot, because that is written to the Israelites under the law. We'll be dealing with that in the next video. We can learn from tithing in the law. We can learn. All right. And this is what we learn. Giving should be used for compensating those who lead worship. All right. And leading worship also includes, of course, the teaching. So the pastors and those things, they can be compensated. Paul didn't always take, even though he could. And I tend to follow the Pauline example in that area, and God has been good to me, so that I have not had to go to the church and say, hey, yeah, guys, y'all need to start helping me out here. Congregational celebrations. I'm sorry, this bothers me out of all of this. I mean, the church is constantly begging. You have church beg for money. I'm going to show you next time. The church is never supposed to sit there and beg or ask you for money. They're not. That is totally biblically wrong. I don't care who is teaching it. It is wrong. It is absolutely wrong. But this whole celebration, I can't stand it when I hear somebody say, yeah, well, I'm going to the church picnic. It's $30 a person. Why is it $30 a person? Y'all been giving money all year. Why is it $30 a person? And here's the other thing. Everybody is not in the same financial position as everyone else, right? And everybody doesn't have the spiritual gift for liberality, which is the ability to give a lot. God has given some people that gift. The other thing is, you get in that whole concept of, oh, okay, well, these people were actually, the church will do this. Only our tithers get in free. The rest of you all have to pay 30. Stupidity. All right. And then there should be earmarked a portion for those in need, and that shouldn't be held against them. There are churches that I know pastors that do this too. Someone comes to church, says, we're really hurting, and we've reached out, we've done A, B, C, or D, don't know what to do, and the pastor will literally say, go look at the ledger and see what their tithes look like, and see if they ain't been giving nothing, they ain't getting nothing. Well, when did the church turn into a bank that you deposited your money, so in case something went bad, you could go back to the bank and pull out your savings? Asinine. That's what that is. That is asinine teaching. And you can get mad at me all you want to, and we can talk about it, because it is asinine. And I've had pastors, I've been on the radio where they've come back, and when I've talked about this stuff, they have really not liked me at all. And that's okay. That's okay. I can handle that. All right. So that is tithing during the law. And I hope you understand, we are not, no way, shape, or form, bound by what the law did with Israel. That was to fulfill the vow that Jacob made. That was Israel's way of taking care of the Levitical priesthood. And before somebody says, well, okay, so they took care of the Levitical priesthood, so then all of the money really, really goes to the pastors. Well, you know what? You could put all the money to the pastors. That's fine. That's what you want to do. The pastor should get paid and all of that, but it has nothing to do with the Levitical priesthood. I mean, because now we are a royal priesthood. So it had to do with those that were specifically in leading the worship. Because if that were the case, then we would give the money and then give it back all to each other. So we will come back with tithing after the law, and we will look at actually what we should be doing in the age of grace from the perspective of, do we tithe or not tithe? So I'm going to be doing Malachi, and that's what that next video is going to be about specifically, and the what I call the lie of Malachi that is used on us, because it wasn't talking to us and has nothing to do with us. All right, thanks for watching. Click on the cards, subscribe, do all of those wonderful things. I appreciate you. Have a good one.